Hey everyone, we're at the iBUYPOWER suite now at CES 2019. There are two products here we're looking at primarily. One is the Revolt 3, which the Revolt 2 you might remember from, I don't know, like 2015 or 16 or something. It was one of the first ads we ever did. So Revolt 3 is here, but this is far more interesting. It's Project Snowblind X4. And Project Snowblind we've, I think, shown at CES and PAX year after year for a couple of years now. It's been more or less perfected on the paneling side, and for a recap, if you don't remember, it's just the side panel is an LCD, and you get a display out on it. A quick note here, in A-roll shots, these will not be scaled correctly because I've removed two of the panels. So this is one of the panels, but that's minor detail. You'll see the correction in B-roll for the proper scaling. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Deep-Cool Captain 240 Pro AIO cooler. The Captain 240 Pro uses a bladder within the water tank to expand and contract based upon liquid temperature as a leak prevention mechanism. This works by burping air at higher temperatures, making for a unique closed-loop liquid cooler design. The Captain 240 Pro also expands upon the existing Captain series by extending tube length for more flexible positioning and updating the LEDs. Learn more at the link in the description below. So the paneling's been more or less perfected. This is a very early prototype. It was thrown together pretty quickly for the show, so things will be cleaned up. But the idea is it's 4 panels from the Snowblind on one case, and it's a cube, so it's symmetrical, making things a bit easier to mock up. And then advanced upon that is the rotation. So here's where it gets a bit difficult, because you've clearly got sort of 4 different compartmentalized chambers, or at least 3, depending on how you cut it up. And all those have different cables. I mean, this reservoir over here, pump res, combo, stuff like that, they've got cables that are all routing somewhere. And in order to hook it all up in a way that they don't get tangled as it spins, they are routing through a center chamber. And you'll see some B-roll shots we have of that, the cables feeding into that chamber. And that's got a slip ring in it. And then there's a bearing in the base that's sort of like the same thing you'd use for a high-end turntable or something like that, where you might be rotating a heavy object for display. So same type of thing here, just the only really difficult part that had to be overcome was making sure the cables don't get all intertwined as it spins. So kind of cool. This is a Halo product. It's a CES showcase product. Far more interesting than some of the real products we've seen in the show, so we're happy about that. If you're wondering about the price, the mock-up was about $8 grand, and maybe plus or minus a little bit there, but the production model is TBD. So if you're interested in this, you have to let them know in the comments, because otherwise it might not come to market. But the original Snowblind, it was the same type of thing, where the case was very much early prototype, and there was a lot of interest in it, and so iBUYPOWER eventually started making it. They have updated versions here, actually, we have some footage of as well, where the inside's now really cleaned up and starting to look pretty good. So same story there as here, where there has to be interest, otherwise it just ends up being a showpiece. But very expensive. There's no real tooling for it yet, no dies, anything like that. This was done mostly by hand. The panels are the easy part here, although they probably took the longest to put together because it was a years-long process. For the Snowblind, it's just the interior is multiple bent steel sheets. So I think if you know the Snowblind, you know most of this. It's just now it's a cube and it rotates. There were a few comments we saw or heard about, at least online, criticizing airflow, which is always a fair critique. In this one, though, so the way it's set up is the top is your exhaust in this current system, and then the bottom does have a giant mesh hole in it. So it does have cutouts for air. It's got, I think, 2 240s right here. You can have 240s in a case without having airflow. It's been done. See plenty of, I don't know, like Fantex cases recently, for example. But in this one, there's about an inch gap between the base, the proper base, and the rotating cube. So there is hopefully sufficient room for air. We would have to test it to really know. But what you see is not what you get. It's not like this is the only place the air can come in. It can come in through the bottom too. So ultimately, you don't spend the money on this type of system if it's going to have a Hyper 212 in it. So probably not really a huge deal anyway. You can compensate for most of the airflow with liquid cooling, and it all ultimately will come down to how they market it. If it's marketed as a high airflow case, then obviously that's a different story. But yeah, that's the Snowblind X4. And if you're interested in it, you need to let iBUYPOWER know. We can move on to the Revolt 3, I think. Oh, one more note on the panels. So they're 18.5 inch, 16 by 9, and the resolution is 1366 by 768, which is the maximum resolution that iBUYPOWER could source for this panel size and aspect ratio. So just to answer that question. And the video playback engine is software on the host computer, plays back video you set in software, and an abstract design like this will work a bit better because since it's playing across multiple panels, you don't have any issues with things lining up properly. And then also, the biggest challenge, I guess, was in the top, where we have some footage of the cabling, dealing with multiple display outputs from a modern NVIDIA card, where you're kind of capped at 4 outputs. You have one HDMI out on most of the RTX series, except for some of the partner models, and that's a challenge. They all go through an MST, and we have shots of how that's wired up. AMD with iFinity, probably a bit easier, but working with NVIDIA here. So let's move on to the Revolt 3. That's the next one. It's a smaller case, and it's been updated a bit, but still in prototype stages. The Revolt 3 is a bit of a different story from the previous one because this one will become a shipping product. This is a bit of a prototype, so our understanding is that due to customs and the government shutdown, it's not fully complete because they were trying to rush things through to make sure it got here in time for CES. So some of the stuff like in the bottom is incomplete, like the mesh that you see down here. Clearly it's not going to be just a sheet that you can depress into the case when it's done. So work in progress, but the most interesting thing here that I wanted to bring up right away is that you can put in a mini-ITX board and then use a bifurcation card. So this PCIe bifurcation, you plug it into the slot and then you can get 2 cards out and it just splits a by 16 into 2 by 8s, which is pretty interesting. The challenge is that you would need a board with NVIDIA SLI certification for NVIDIA. Crossfire doesn't really have as strict requirements on that end. It also can run with by 4 if you really wanted to. SLI, though, requires by 8 and SLI certification in, there's like a special switch that gets checked in the motherboard side. So if it doesn't have that, it won't work. And that's not on iBUYPOWER, that's gonna be on board vendors. But if NVIDIA will certify a board with a single slot as SLI capable, then in theory you could insert this, plug 2 cards in, and you get 2 by 8 coming out of it. SLI certification, though, costs a whole lot of money. It is, depending on how you purchase it, it can be in the tens of thousands of dollars for the company. So we'll see if that happens. There would be a board partner that would need to be willing to go through that process with NVIDIA and pay the dues in order to work with iBUYPOWER on that for this. But some companies have provided special BIOS versions that bypass some of that in the past, so you might see that. Either way, though, the Revolt 3 is the case itself. You'll see some kind of split level stuff in here where there's, in just this side leg material, there's a split where you can insert more of these, and then there's a rail system that screws into it, and that allows the height to be somewhat adjustable while remaining theoretically stable and structurally sound. So, I mean, it's a small case. Currently it has about a 200 millimeter fan, like a 180 in there as well, or 180 radiator. Down on the bottom, there could be 2 120s instead, if that route makes more sense. This is still in finalization stages, but the idea is you get tempered glass on a few sides and hopefully some mesh in the bottom, I think, is somewhat the plan. Ventilation on the top, and then a small mini-ITX form factor in obviously a very looks-oriented build. If you wanted to, I guess you could flip it on its side, but that's not really a feature as much as it is a consequence of physics. So that's the Revolt 3. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly, or store.gamersnexus.net. I will see you all next time.